Thank you, friends, for gathering on this solemn occasion. Thank you for caring about the evil, the monstrous, inexcusable evil that 20 years ago scarred our nation. To memorialize that day, we'll hear from a man who was there under attack. We'll hear from a soldier who wore the uniform, a combat veteran, a patriot who fought for us, risking life and limb. Others, scoundrels who hate this country but still dare to call themselves Americans, pretend to care. They go on TV and lecture us to remember 9/11, as if we could forget. As if for one moment we might call from memory the shock, the horror, the sight of enemies cheering. No, we've not forgotten, though often we wish we could. Through the intervening decades, many wanted to purge from mind those wretched, sorrowful events, but we cannot. We must not. For we recall great heroes too. We recall brave men and women who took up the fallen banner, who raised Old Glory above the ruins. We recall the first responders, the soldiers, the Air Force pilots, so loyal, so valiant that they would give everything to defend us. We recall Americans lining up to donate blood, singing patriotic anthems. We recall the gallant men who stormed the cockpit of United Flight 93, sacrificing themselves for the cause of right. It hurts to recall 9/11. It's painful. Yet if hope remains, if we've any prospect of redemption, it's because of those lost heroes. If their courage and sacrifice be forgotten, what in the name of heaven shall we remember? Listening to General Brown, each good-hearted American cannot help but mourn what we've lost. Losses that extend across the sea to Afghanistan and the shameful tragedy unfolding there. We cannot ignore the ache in our breast, for the wounds of 9/11 linger still. But as we grieve, let us honor the noble memory of those patriots, great Americans, whose examples burn like torches, lighting the path forward. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome one of my heroes, General Tex Brown.
Thank you for the intro. And let me start out and quickly just say that what I'd like to do is talk a little about how I got to where I am, then get on to the day 9/11 and what all that meant to my experience and what it meant to America. Bottom line is, let's not forget we're still the greatest nation in the world. Even though we may think we're having little difficulties now, which we are, we're still by far, and all it takes is going around the world a little bit and you find out everybody wants to be us. Everybody wants to be America, and we should be proud that we are Americans. Well, I started out as a preacher's kid. My dad was a pastor. We moved around a bit. He had churches in California, Texas, and Oklahoma. Growing up, I just wanted to be a baseball player. I played ball every chance I could of all sports, but my favorite and best was baseball. I actually went to TCU to play baseball for college. I was there starting in '66. But my end of my sophomore year, the lottery system started for our United States military draft, and I was a very low lottery number. It was a good thing in that it gave all of us my age direction. We knew you're going to go serve or you weren't. I was certainly willing to serve, but my plans were to go become a Major League Baseball player. So those plans went on hold for a bit. With the low lottery number, I didn't wait for the Army to draft me. I went ahead and joined the Air Force ROTC, which we had at TCU. I then graduated in 1970, went straight to pilot training. And 1 year after pilot training, I found myself in Vietnam flying the A-1 Skyraider, which was a tremendous opportunity, airplane, camaraderie. I spent a year in combat. The old A-1 Skyraider was a propeller-driven airplane we built in World War II, put on the mothballs, and then brought back to fly close air support, escort helicopters, things like that throughout the Vietnam era. Catherine alluded to the decorations. I ended up being highly decorated, mostly because of just the situations I was thrust into. by 1972, which was the bulk of the year I spent in Vietnam, was in 1972. We had a lot of airplanes shot down during that time period, but we got really good at bringing pilots back out. Certainly, we didn't get them all out because many of them ended up in Hanoi Hilton. But we got good at rescuing people out, and that was the business I was in. So it was extremely rewarding. I'm one of the few guys that would say my year in Vietnam was one of the greatest years of my life, because it was fantastic to go talk to a guy on the radio. He's just jumped out of an airplane. He's in enemy territory. He's got bad guys all around him, and we had the opportunity to pick him up out of the jungle, bring him back home, and grown men would stand and cry on the flight line when you brought a guy back from the clutches of the enemy. So that was a tremendous year. I was just a lieutenant. It was such an impact on my life and that I ended up making a career in the Air Force. I hadn't planned on that. So I spent 34 and a half years flying fighters throughout most of my career in the Air Force, in Europe, Pacific, even had tours in South America, Alaska, Hawaii, just all over the world. I didn't get my first Pentagon assignment until 1998, and I just pinned on my second star. So I went to the Pentagon for 18 months, 1998, in a staff job. Fortunately, the chief of staff invited me to leave there in January of 2000 and come down to Randolph Air Force Base right here in San Antonio, where I live now, and command the Air Force Personnel Center. And that was a great chance to command, to get out of the Pentagon and move to Texas. So, I loved it. Actually, it's when I met the O'Gormans. I met Catherine's parents, who had just become, Ann and I, two of our best friends. And that was in the 2000 timeframe. I spent 18 months as a commander of Personnel Center. Thought I would likely retire, but then the chief asked me to come back up, put on the third star, and go back to the Pentagon. So I arrived back in the Pentagon in August of 2001 to become the chief of personnel for the Air Force. So I actually took the place of the guy who'd been my boss. I was there. I got there on the 15th of August, pinned on my third star right away. And then I can remember on September 10th of 2001, I was at a luncheon with all the other chiefs of personnel of all the services, and they were kind of welcoming me to the fraternity of personnel. These were all 3 stars from the Army, Navy, Marine, the Joint Staff. I sat right next to and met for the first time a Lieutenant General Tim Maud, M-A-U-D. He was the Chief of Staff of Personnel for the Army. I mentioned him because the next morning, the airplane that enters the Pentagon enters right through his office. He was in it. He was instantly killed. He's the ranking person killed in the Pentagon on that next morning. September 11th. It's 8:30 in the morning in the Pentagon, and we have a brand new chief of staff. The one that had hired me had retired on that Friday. The new one came in to work. He actually stayed home on Monday and helped deliver household goods. And his first day in the office was Tuesday morning, September 11th. So we held a big staff meeting down in the Air Force bunker facility where we do all of our briefings. And it's in the basement of the Pentagon, kind of under the SecDef's office. There was about 40 of us in that staff meeting. It's just a brand new chief, 4-star. It's his first meeting with all of his staff. So every general in the Pentagon that's an Air Force guy is in that meeting. You can imagine there's all kinds of 3 stars and 2 stars and a few 1 stars. Like the colonels can't even get in the meeting. It's too big. It's 8:30 when the meeting's called, and at about 8:41 or 2, airman sneaks in and whispers in the ear of the secretary and the chief of staff, and they say, "Put it up on the screen." And up on our 3 screens down in that basement conference room, we see the smoking first tower up in New York. And as we're sitting there watching, most of us with our mouths dropped open, kind of wondering what could this be. And commentators are mentioning, well, about navigation error and all kinds of theories. But I'm in a room full of pilots, military pilots, most of us with 3,000-4,000 hours of flying time. And we're looking at a blue sky day in New York City, which is pretty unusual. This is navigation error. And as we're watching, within 2-3 minutes, the second airplane hits the second tower. So we watch all that. It's immediately clear to us this is an active hostile intent. This is not an accident. We're the ones that actually, through the Secretary, call up the Secretary of Defense and recommend a stand down of all aircraft in the nation. Get everybody either grounded on the ground and don't let anybody else get airborne. We come out of there with the idea we're going to launch whatever fighters we can find. We don't have fighters on alert at this point. We've quit sitting air defense alert. We quit doing that shortly after the wall came down back in 1989 and 90. So trying to scramble fighter jets to get them airborne, wondering is there some other enemy we need to, we still don't know what so the unknown was probably the thing that I remember the most. We just didn't know what we didn't know. It was about 9:10 that morning that we each leave that conference room, headed back to our own offices. As the chief of personnel, my job was to do an accounting, start a telephone tree of the entire Air Force to try to account for all the airmen, all the people of the Air Force. Just make sure we didn't have somebody in New York City near the towers. It's pretty, it's not common, but we certainly know how to do an accountability. And that was my job as the personnel guy. I'm walking across the center of the Pentagon. If you've ever been there, it's 5 stories high. It's 5 sides. There's 5 rings. That's why it's called the Pentagon. Everything's in 5s. But the very center is a courtyard. It's open air. We got trees growing up in the very center of it. It is a large building, 6.5 million square foot of office. It's the largest office building in the world. It's just not tall. But I had the thought as I'm walking across, my office is almost all the way the other side of the Pentagon from where our conference room was. And so I don't go around, I go through the center of the courtyard. And as I'm walking through the courtyard, I look up and I have this thought, we'd be an easy target. The towers were an easy target because they were so tall. The Pentagon, even though it's not tall, it's so big, and parking all around it. There's nothing around it that's any taller. So I had the thought we'd be an awful easy target. The other easy target would be the Capitol. The White House would not be an easy target. It'd be very difficult, especially for an amateur, but even a trained pilot to pick out and find the White House. But the Capitol would be pretty easy. It sits up on a hill. Those are the thoughts I've had as I'm walking across. I go across the other side to my office on about the second corridor. It's probably 9:15. I have a standard staff meeting that starts at 9:30 where my staff gathers. I have a Zoom with the guy who took my place, the 2-star down at the Personnel Center, because the Personnel Center is where all personnel true work gets done. I'm just with a staff and represent them up on the Pentagon. So at 9:30, we start a staff meeting. I've got Major General Mike McMahon on the phone. He's my successor, telling Mike what's happened up in New York, what we're doing as a military to respond to that. And while I'm talking to him on the Zoom, the Pentagon is struck at 9:37. I felt 2 explosions. The first one was probably the airplane actually hitting the building. A second and a half later, a secondary explosion, which was even a bigger boom than the first one. And that was likely the fuel explosion. This airplane that had taken off, we know now had left Dulles, was on its way to Los Angeles, was probably taken over by the terrorists somewhere at Level and turned right back around. It still had it was a 4-hour flight to go to LA, and it probably had 2 hours of fuel reserve on board, so it was fully fueled, and that was the secondary explosion. There was no doubt in my mind when those explosions occurred that we had just been hit by an airplane. Some later would say they weren't sure it was a bomb, but in my mind, there was no doubt it was an airplane. And we just had what happened to us, what happened in New York the hour before. All the lights went out, everything flashed. Interesting, the Zoom, the video cut off and then came right back on. We had emergency lights come on in the conference room I was in. Turns out we know now, I was about 75 yards from the actual entry point of the airplane, so pretty close. I immediately told everybody, get out the door, head to the river entrance, because it was clear to me the explosions had occurred west of us, so it made everybody go east. Make sure no one's left behind. We'll all meet in the grass out on the river entrance near the Potomac. I stayed long enough to talk with the two-star on the Zoom because it's back up. In fact, the first words that are said, he says, "What happened?" Because he could tell something had happened to us 1,500 miles away from him. I told him we just got attacked and we're going to be clearing the building out. I said, I don't know the damage. I know that right now in this room we're fine. As we opened the door, we could see smoke coming down the hallway. There wasn't fire, but there was smoke and ash. So I told the staff, clear out the room and head east down the corridor. I talked to Joe McMahon for maybe another 15, 20 seconds about, okay, Mike, I don't know what shape we're in, but right now you've got control of our Air Force. You're the ranking guy in personnel. I don't know what our command center is going to be like. You initiate any action that needs to be done. Truly start the recall of all the Air Force people. And until further notice, you're in command of the Air Force. As I finished that, I looked around. There wasn't a single person in the room. They had first time they followed my orders like that in a long time. But man, they didn't even wait a heartbeat. I didn't know how to turn the machine off. I was so brand new, so I just left it running. He said he turned off at his end. I go out in the hallway, and there's a captain standing there, and he's kind of shaking. Sir, we gotta go. We gotta go now. They told me to wait for you. I said, okay, Derek, let's just stay calm. I went to across the hall to my office, got my keys, my hat, wallet, and we went and we started pushing doors open all the way down the hallway. There was nobody left behind, which was good. You never know what's going on in the Pentagon. I mean, staff officers don't sit around with TVs on. Possible somebody just their head down doing a staff summary sheet or doing some sort of report and doesn't even realize it. The place is on fire. But we left no one behind. We went out the river entrance. By the time I got out there, well, I grabbed my cell phone. I took that with me. We had just were the early stages of cell phones. And I get outside, and what I find is about another 22,000 other people all standing outside. And everybody's got their hands to their ear as they're trying to open up and talk on their cell phones. At this point, there was no availability of cell coverage. Whatever it was tied up. So I spent about 4 hours outside. At one point, it was very orderly. So some people were crying, some were, certainly upset, but there wasn't a disorder to it struck me. In a military setting, everybody just kind of follows orders and stayed very calm. Now, within the Pentagon itself, those that had left and gone into that center area, some of those were going back in trying to do some rescue work and find others that were still stuck. It turns out after the fact, we know that about 1/10 of the building was destroyed. It entered on the west side between corridors 4 and 5. 125 people in the Pentagon were killed. Probably another 100 or 200 were injured. 64 or 5 people on the airplane. I think so. The total was 189. tenth of the building was destroyed. If it had been fully occupied, we should expect a tenth of the people could have been either injured or killed, which would have been somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,300, because we have 23,000 people at the time worked in the Pentagon. But that particular wedge, we were in a series of renovations within the Pentagon, a 10-year project, and 1/5 of the Pentagon was being renovated every 2 years. The place where it hit, and this is God's grace, was the area that had just finished. In fact, people hadn't even moved back in yet. It was so early in the finishing stages of the 2-year project to completely redo that wedge. The fire suppression systems were brand new. The corridors had been cleaned. Many of the offices weren't even occupied yet. Some were occupied. Yes, we had some folks killed, but it could have been so much worse. The 3-star general I mentioned having lunch with the day before, he was in his office and he was at point 0 contact. His wall sides up with another Army general named Van Antwerp. He was the head civil engineer. Van Antwerp that particular day had called an off-site meeting of his staff. They might do that annually, go out to some other place for the day, get away from the phones. So he wasn't there. But and I knew Van very well. In fact, we were in a general officer Bible study together on Thursday mornings. He was not in the building. He and his staff were gone. His secretary was. His exec was. They were answering the phones. His exec was a guy named Brian Birdwell, Lieutenant Colonel. Brian had gone down to the men's room at about 9:35. He was about to step out of the men's room door, had just opened it when the airplane hit. But he was pretty far interior to the building. He's on the 4th floor. As he stepped out the door of the airplane, and he looks up and sees a fireball coming down, much like in a movie you'd see a fireball. Well, in the movies you run away from them and somehow it stays right behind you. That's not real life. Brian said that fireball hit him and knocked him to the ground. He's laying on the ground. He knows he's burning up, and strong Christian guy. He just said, "Jesus, I'm yours." And at that point, the fire suppressor, which was brand new, it lit up. It started raining water, and it poured water. He was laying right below it. He had the sense enough to roll over and douse out the other side of his body. He says that's what saved his life. Now, he's burned very badly, but he was literally saved by that sprinkler. He ends up getting pulled out 15, 20 minutes later. He said it felt like a lifetime. He ends up in the burn center, Washington Burn Center. He was probably the most burned and yet lived person in the Pentagon that day. He's there, and on the 3rd day of being in the burn center, and with some other folks who were burned, President and Laura Bush, they make a visit. No cameras, no media. They just go in to visit those that have been injured. President Bush stops at the foot of Brian Birdwell's bed. His wife is sitting there beside him, and he salutes the Lieutenant Colonel. His wife tells the story that Brian, and he's wrapped from head to toe. His head's all wrapped in. You can only see his eyes. His arms are totally wrapped up. And he tries to lift his right arm to return the salute. In fact, his wife has to help him take his elbow and bring his hand to his eyebrow so he can salute the president back. I tell you that because that's kind of president we had. He was a man, like in the book of Esther, where Mordecai tells Esther, you're here for a time such as this. And certainly he's probably not the best president we ever had, but he's my favorite. He was the right man at that time for our country to respond to what we had happen to us. I later had a chance to be in a ballpark on opening day up in Boston that next year. And right after the attack, I don't know where it came from, but the largest United States flag I've ever seen in my life, and maybe the largest one that's ever been made, it was draped over the hole at the Pentagon to cover it up, so that as passerbys for the next few weeks wouldn't see a big hole in the Pentagon. They'd just see this huge American flag that was draped over the Pentagon hole. Well, that same flag on April 1st or whatever day it was, opening season of 2002 in Boston, was draped over the Green Monster. It covered the entire wall called the Green Monster in left field in Fenway Park. I was honored to get asked to come up and be the commander of troops, because we had 50 airmen, soldiers, sailors, Marines standing at the base of the Green Monster. And when after the Star Spangled Banner was done, they rolled that flag down, and it took 50 of them carrying it on their shoulders to carry that flag back into the underground of Fenway Park. And I got to be on the field with them doing that. Well, I mention that because President Bush also, right after 9/11, during the World Series of 2001, baseball, everything stopped for about 4 or 5 days. And then we needed to heal. And there were more people in church that Sunday in America than had been ever before, or maybe since. And MLB, Major League Baseball, decided to start the season back up because America needed to heal. So they did finish the season. And there's a little video clip that Catherine has. If we're able to show that, to me, it really shows, again, President Bush and what he meant to our country at that time. We responded. We responded well. We're the greatest nation on earth. We always will be. We may have to recapture some things right now, and that's part of what our Red Republican Party needs to do. But Catherine, if you could show that video, it's about 4 minutes long. I think it says a lot about the recovery of our nation and our president.
People are lined up 10, 20, 50 deep. It's a mob scene outside. Much more of a police presence. You go through the magnetometer, hand search. This had another level of intensity to it. I remember seeing guys holding automatic weapons, and I remember thinking to myself, this is now my America.
Walking into the locker room and seeing a bomb dog go through your locker. These were reminders of what was going on around us.
Another reason for the heightened security was the appearance of a guest from Washington.
As we walked into the locker room, there was a gentleman standing there we had never seen before. He says, well, President Bush is going to come, and he's going to throw out the first pitch, and we need a Secret Service agent on the field, and so I am going to dress as an umpire. He had communications, he had guns, he had things hooked on the back, he had things hooked on the front. And I said, how are you going to hide all that stuff? He says, don't worry, he says, it'll disappear. All of a sudden, there was a knock at the door, and President Bush walked into our room.
Thank you. Will you do me a favor and say hi to my son, because he's one of your biggest supporters? Jimmy?
What's his name?
Jimmy.
Jimmy, how are you?
Well, when you're president, all you have to do is say you're showing up, and they kind of ask you to throw out the first pitch, no matter what time of year it is.
This is my first World Series.
Is it really?
Yeah. vowed I'd never go to a World Series unless the Rangers got in. And I changed that vow. You know, I wanted to make sure that if I was going to throw out the ball, I was able to do so with a little zip. You know, I didn't want people to think that their president was incapable of finding the plate. So I go underneath the Yankee Stadium, in the bowels of Yankee Stadium, and there's a hitting cage there.
And he's wearing his bulletproof jacket, and he's getting his arm loose. And Derek Jeter comes up to him.
Hey, Prez, how are you doing? Good, Derek. That's good luck tonight. Thank you, sir. He said, say, I hear you're throwing out the first ball.
So I just asked him if he was going to be throwing the first pitch from the mound or in front of the mound.
The president said, I think I'll throw from the base of the mound. Jeter said, I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. President.
And I told him, you better throw it from the mound, otherwise you're going to get booed. I said, this is Yankee Stadium.
I said, okay, I'll throw from the mound. And he's walking out, and he looks over his shoulder, and he says, don't bounce it. They'll boo you. And so the pressure, all of a sudden, I mean, I'm sitting there kind of fairly relaxed and feeling fairly loose, and the great Derek Jeter, don't bounce it. They'll boo you. All of a sudden, the pressure mounted.
The President of the United States.
I'd never felt what I'd felt before when I walked out of that dugout. I felt the raw emotion of the Yankee fans.
USA! USA! USA!
The crowd just erupts in a chant of USA. There is nothing like it that I've ever experienced at a ball game. It was overwhelming. It was just overwhelming.
President Bush is standing out there like a brick wall. I'm not afraid of terrorists. I'm going to stand all out here. I'm going to give you a thumbs up, and I'm going to throw a strike.
I didn't vote for him, but at that point, my personal feelings about him as a politician is gone. I watched him, and he was my representative, and I had never felt that way before.
Very nice throw, Mr. President. Good stuff, good stuff.
At that moment, everybody there was there for baseball and to show the world that in spite of what can happen to us, we'll pull ourselves together, and what is our life and our way of life will continue.
United we stand. We stand together in the face of this threat. We will play baseball in the midst of the beginnings of this war. No matter what the threat may be to us, the United States of America will stand strong and will never be intimidated.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank all of you for listening. God bless you, and God bless America.